Fascist architecture is a subcategory of a larger movement that goes by many names and is rooted in ideas and events that we often casually refer to as Marxist. Karl Marx's contribution to this lugubrious circus cannot be overstated, but of course there were hundreds, if not thousands, of others whom the Industrial Revolution provided with an opportunity to speak, write, lecture, or philosophize for a living. The textiles were mechanized, spinning and weaving was now done at the factory rather than at home. The steam engine pumped rainwater out of the coal mine, and all that freed a lot of hands. While publishing had become a profitable business, and publishers needed content. The American Revolution turned priests into entrepreneurs. The separation of church and state forced American priests to be active, to grow their parishes, to remember their duty as Christians, to go back to the roots, which is, of course, the good news, instead of just going through the motions. On the other side of the ocean, the French Revolution massacred priests, celebrated atheism, and enabled the first harbinger of what I call teenage rebellion. In many cases, adolescence could now be prolonged. Opportunities existed for an 18-year-old to do something other than hard manual work. One could get an education, become a public speaker, write essays and get paid for it, which is easier than farm work or factory work because you're not exhausted by the end of the day. And even though Robespierre and Danton were in their mid-30s, some of what they said and did suggests adolescent mentality. Both were lawyers. Robespierre led a frugal lifestyle, defended mostly poor people in courts, and supplemented his income by publishing essays. Danton was a corporate lawyer and lived rather well prior to the revolution. Now, after becoming the most powerful men in the country, the two of them stood in front of Notre Dame, deciding what they should do with, as they put it,
this Gothic junk pile. What should we do with it?
We could just demolish it. It's too much of a symbol of religion, and since we're getting rid of religion, we might as well knock the thing down.
How much would it cost?
Probably a lot, so maybe it's not a good idea after all.
So eventually they decided to rename it. For a while, Notre Dame was the Temple of Reason. The name does sound completely nonsensical because it is. But teenagers, including overgrown teenagers, don't bother with such sissy sentiments as good sense. Most of the time they're perfectly content talking out of their asses, so long as it annoys the preceding generation.
Everything you say or show me is old and boring. It's garbage. You're garbage. I don't care. Shut up.
The general idea, though, wasn't just about Notre Dame. Those revolutionary hotshots wanted a complete break from the hateful past. Nothing should remind citizens of this new and improved France, of the aristocracy or the church. The calendar was rewritten. Days of the week and months of the year were received new names. Language, too, had to change. You know, all those old-fashioned mawkish addresses had to go, like Madame, Monsieur, Mademoiselle. No, everyone was now citizen.
Would you like cream with your coffee, citizen?
How much are those apples, citizen?
Well, eventually Robespierre sentenced Danton to death, following which he himself was guillotined. And then there was the Directory, and finally Napoleon took power and put a stop to all that chaotic nonsense. You know, mass executions, gratuitous mob violence, language mangling, the anti-clerical sentiments, and so forth. Well, not quite. See, the agreement, the accord between Napoleon and the church was, well, flimsy, to put it mildly. He did not shoot priests, but he did hold the Pope hostage for some time. Architecture under Napoleon's rule changed. New construction was suddenly strictly Greco-Roman, with a twist. Napoleon wished to create an empire that would match Roman antiquity in all its glory and grandeur. But he was too busy putting together reforms and fighting off those numbered coalitions. You know, England, Austria, Prussia, Russia, they kept joining forces to kick his ass. And he kept fending them off quite successfully, every time except the last two. The Industrial Revolution was in the meantime gaining strength. Then came a point that should not have been overlooked by many powers, many forces, and many people. You see, an average factory employee in the United States worked anywhere from 12 to 16 hours a day, 6 days a week, making just enough money to support himself and his family, like from $1 to $1.25 a day. His wife, in addition to raising the kids, cooking and cleaning, often had to supplement the family's income with sewing or taking in laundry. And this was exhausting. On the other hand, immigration to the United States never ceased, which would imply that the conditions over in, say, Germany or Italy or England, the conditions there were even worse. And Ireland was starving. Now, church representatives, the clergy on both sides of the Atlantic, protested as was their Christian duty. In 1890, Pope Leo XIII issued an official papal letter saying,
A small number of very rich men have been able to lay upon the teeming masses of the laboring poor a yoke little better than that of slavery itself.
the small number of very rich men just shrugged. Like the governments, they too were short-sighted. They ignored the warning signs. Not all of them, most of them. Karl Marx and people like him, who, like Robespierre and Danton before them, never had to do any manual work, they saw an opportunity. They would not merely inform the masses, since merely informing the masses is quite pointless. They would manipulate the masses, pushing them towards rebellion. Rioting became the norm in many countries. Okay, so those robber barons were pretty much asking for it, yes. Better wages and shorter work days would have been far more productive and more profitable, as Henry Ford later demonstrated. And mind you, it would have been more Christian. But that's not even the point we're making here. Bear with me. So, those crowd-agitating, rabble-rousing hotshots, okay, so the current setup was unjust, unfair, oppressive, disgusting. But what alternatives did they have to offer? Generally just one, although it came in several different flavors. Please act surprised now. Like, what? Just one alternative? Yeah, just one. According to them, the government had to step in and institute new laws, and if the government failed to do so, it had to be overthrown and a new one installed. Under this new government, all industries would be nationalized, run by the state, and subsequently the state would ensure fair distribution of wealth, surplus value, food, goods, morals, medicine, education, the correct interpretation of history, and so forth.
Una furtiva lagrima.
What do people mean today when they say fascist? Let's see. A fascist is a person we dislike intensely, a really mean person who we believe should be stripped of all his or her possessions immediately and thrown in jail for the rest of his or her miserable life. Our laws do not allow this, but maybe they should. Which is not an entirely accurate definition of fascists or fascism. A more accurate one would be a person who believes in the absolute rule of the state. Now, is that good or bad? Benito Mussolini adapted Fasces as his party's logo as a symbol of power, control, and strict adherence to the law. The law could not be questioned, dismissed, or ignored except by the state, nor could it be changed except when the state felt like changing it, just for laughs. Anyone who disagreed with this arrangement would have to face the consequences of being an irresponsible member of society. Fasces literally means a bundle or a sheaf, like a bundle of kindling or sticks. It was a famous political symbol in ancient Rome when it was still when Rome was still a republic, like a bundle of wooden rods tied tightly together around an axe. Lictors, those who carried them on their shoulders, by the way, they were important officials' bodyguards. The importance of an official could be gauged by how many lictors he was accompanied by. Now, in the beginning of the 20th century, nobody found any of that objectionable. It was just another logo. As a matter of fact, the dime, minted in 1916 and through 1944, featured fasces along with an olive branch. What did they mean by that? I have no idea. We'll kick your ass first and apologize later? I don't know. Mussolini assumed power in Italy and quickly changed the country's setup in accordance with the ideas and ideals I just described. The state was everything, the individual was nothing, and when this happened, many leaders of perfectly democratic republics admired him. FDR especially was fond of Mussolini, and the admiration was mutual. They were pen pals. A lot of the New Deal was, they tell me, inspired by Mussolini and later praised by Mussolini. However, before Mussolini, there were also, Lenin and Trotsky, who were communists. There's another term that gets bandied about without anyone truly understanding it. Well, it's roughly the same idea with a different flavor. Karl Marx insisted in his writings, let me state this without overstepping the boundaries of decorum,
Like the stupid, unmitigated, unkempt, drunken, parasitic, bearded asshole that he was.
I'm sorry, I don't know what came over me just now. Marx insisted that socialism as a system was impossible to inculcate in a single country. The movement had to be worldwide, which is why Lenin did not even believe in countries, borders, and all the rest of it. The Bolsheviks were supposed to start that social revolution in the Russian Empire, following which this revolution would naturally quickly spread throughout the world. Factory workers and peasants would rise up everywhere and overthrow their oppressors. And if a wealthy neighbor or a store owner got in the way, so much the worse for them. Lenin soon changed his mind and decided to confine this project for now to the territories that would soon be named the Soviet Union. Once the socialist system was fully instituted, the country would start building communism. The socialist maxim, from each according to his means to each according to his labor, would be eventually replaced by from each according to his means to each according to his needs. Money would be phased out. The world would have no borders. Everyone would be united and happy, especially those who were in charge. Now, this idea of the great socialist revolution taking over the entire globe, it never went away. It's very much alive today, as we well know. Even just thinking about those two maxims for a minute reveals how spectacularly absurd they are. I mean, according to his labor, if viewed objectively, would imply, wouldn't it, that a janitor cleaning the toilets in an office building should be making more money than most of the managers in that building who do nothing meaningful all day and would probably ruin the company if they tried to do something. While communism quite obviously would depend on who defines what each person's needs may be, to each according to his needs. Incidentally, communism has been fully achieved at least once in Star Trek. Nobody from Earth buys or sells anything. Money is a thing of the past. There are no social divisions. Folks just casually, without giving it any thought, take whatever material goods or food they need, and those are always available to them. But that's a fantasy, and an awkward one at that. So you see, what it all boils down to is power, the state. The government and the elite rolled into one, with everyone else joyfully towing the party line. Fascism differed from Bolshevism a little bit, a different flavor. The state was supposed to run everything right, but only within one country. Everything else was pretty much the same. Bring everything under government control, regulate everything, imprison or shoot those who disagree or might potentially disagree. By the way, on my Patreon channel, which consists of videos only, I cover a whole bunch of fascinating topics other than architecture. There'll be culture, history, science, space, religion, music. I'm running an ongoing series titled The Excellent Opera Story. It is a story. The narrative covers chronologically the entire golden age of opera. If you're an opera buff, or you don't understand opera, or think you can't truly appreciate it, come on over. The biggest secret is the golden age, which lasted about 80 years, produced 16 operas written by 5 different composers. That's the core. And I guarantee that as you follow the story, I'll be adding videos periodically. You will fall in love with it. Opera is easy. All you need is a few pointers. The link is below. Now, back to the fascists. Different flavors, yes, but largely the same idea stemming from the same source. Every job is a government job. The government decides how much and how often you get paid, where and how you should live, how you should raise your children, or better yet, leave that to the government-run schools. The government decides what your tastes should be, since the government runs not just all schools and universities, but also publishing, theater, art, sports, science. I does the rub. What about the church? You know, Catholic, Lutheran, Anglican, Eastern Orthodox, holy, indivisible, apostolic, with the Savior himself in charge? Ideally, no church. No synagogues either, and no mosques. None. Less than ideally, well, the clergy should be phased out gradually. Well, the Bolsheviks blew up thousands of churches, repurposed others, and imprisoned and shot thousands upon thousands of priests. Then their successor, Joseph Stalin, brought it back for his own purposes during World War II. By then, the Moscow Patriarchate was heavily infiltrated and largely supervised by state security agents. Or so they tell me. Adolf Hitler and his posse persecuted priests, Catholic priests first, of course,
Münsterland and all that.
but all other priests as well, and blew up churches. Some say, well, maybe they spared Lutheran churches since they were part of the nation's history. When you hear that, just point to the one they blew up in Munich and move on. As for Mussolini, who was a staunch atheist, he reached a kind of tentative agreement with the clergy in a country whose population was at that moment 98% Catholic and largely devout. According to that agreement, the clergy would keep their noses and cassocks out of politics and would never, ever criticize him. They were free to praise him. But you see, man is a creature of faith. You have to believe in something. If not God, then what? Well, on this, Hitler and Mussolini were in perfect, heartwarming agreement. The state. You have to believe in the state. The state is your new God. The state is just, the state is often merciless, but do not get in the way, do not express opinions other than those prescribed by the state, and you won't be punished. Fair enough? During his first 3 years as Duce, Mussolini's economic policy was astonishingly successful. He encouraged industrialists, he cut their taxes, he banned strikes, he kicked the union's ass, he deregulated and privatized a ton of stuff. Italy's economy grew 20%. Then came the pivot. When he finally consolidated his dictatorship in 1925, he no longer needed to placate free market folks. He shifted towards a highly interventionist, protectionist system known as the corporate state. This era introduced highly disruptive, state-mandated campaigns like the battle for grain and artificial currency revaluations, which ultimately choked off the growth of the early 1920s. Mussolini and his colleagues were now the elite. Architecture always reflects the mindset of the elite. In order to change things today, we would have to shame our elite into changing their mindset. Get them to focus their esteemed attention on grace, harmony, and beauty. I believe this to be entirely possible and pretty much painless. Could be a lot of fun, actually, for everybody. But I digress. Naturally, the new system, the new culture had to be reflected in the architecture. It almost always is. Ornament was the first thing to go. It was the bourgeoisie toy. Nothing should remind us of those people ever. There is no more bourgeoisie. No ornament. The columns, if you must have columns, should be angular, not rounded. Nothing should be rounded, ever. Those beveled corners in Haussmann's buildings in Paris, where you could put a cafe or a flower shop, no. Bourgeois nonsense. Those oriel windows in New York, forget about it. No, no way. Some called that style stripped classicism. It looks pretty hostile, hardly human scale, unkind to humans, merciless. What did you expect? That's what happens when people distance themselves from God. The government, the elite, was godless, and so was its architecture. People who believe in God seek to make eye-pleasing things for the love of God and their neighbor. Godless people, those who worship the state, build intimidating things, merciless things, soul-crushing things. Good taste just goes out the window. Human scale, human dimension, human sentiment, down the drain. If we are not God's creatures, why spare our feelings? Why cater to us? We're just cogs. Little people, barely useful, interchangeable, disposable. So how is this amusing? Well, it's the sheer hubris of those who thrust those things on us. It's their belief that they are gods. It's completely disproportionate to what they actually are. So, was this nonsense limited to Italy and later Germany or Soviet Union or China, where shortly after World War II, Mao made himself the state? Unfortunately not. You see, the problem with children and grandchildren of robber barons, with people who are born into money, is that many of them tend to take their lifestyle for granted. Surrounded by luxury since infancy, they come to believe that it's it's old hat. They want something different, at least in theory. They believe their parents or grandparents were old-fashioned, limited, a bit provincial, and in some sense evil. And they themselves are just a little bit evil for having all the dough and mansions and summer houses and yachts and golf courses and whatnot. They begin to sympathize with the less fortunate, at a gentlemanly distance, of course, staunchly, uncompromisingly. They believe in fairer distribution of wealth, so long as their own wealth remains safe. They participate in tax-deductible charity events. They donate to all kinds of causes they perceive as noble. They felt uncomfortable being called bourgeois, a slang term derived from the word bourgeois, so they went along with what seemed to be a global trend in their own perfectly democratic countries. And so we've got
Senate House of the University of London, among many other things, 1937. Palais de Chaillot in Paris, 1938. Edificio Alas, Buenos Aires, 1950. Central Library in Brooklyn, New York, 1941.
and on and on. Going to the source. In Rome, you've got
Palazzo della Civiltà Italiana, the Rome Opera Theater. Then there's Casa del Fascio in Como, and many, many more.
Let's not forget the Soviet Union, Children's Theater in St. Petersburg, and China, National Art Museum of China. Speaking of wealthy kids and grandkids,
This is 30 Rockefeller Plaza, built in the year of our Lord 1933.
There was, as you recall, a bit of a scandal involving that mural in the foyer. The owners wanted a famous painter to do that mural, a fresco. Once Pablo Picasso turned them down, they engaged the services of Diego Rivera, an overt communist. Rivera presented some sketches and they were approved, which shows that the owners knew exactly what they were doing. They sympathized with the working class day and night at a gentlemanly distance. Rivera the communist signed a contract for $21,000, which in today's money would be roughly $500,000, give or take, for a month's work. Makes you wonder how so many defenders of the working class managed to make so much money. Some rebellious songwriters from the 1960s have done well for themselves. Some of them are billionaires now. It's pretty comical. Anyway, 3 weeks later, a New York newspaper reported that Rivera's mural was going to be communist propaganda, which of course it was. Rivera was pissed off, and just to make a point, he added Lenin's likeness to the fresco. This worried the owners. They paid Rivera and had the fresco scraped down. Jose Maria Sert was hired, preserving the charming little tradition, still strong in those days, of American aristocracy favoring foreign artists over local talent. I mean, that's not very patriotic, is it? Oh boy. John French Sloan was alive, one of America's greatest painters. Whatever. Take a good look at Rockefeller Plaza. No ornament, right angles. The similarities are obvious. A parallel movement known as Bauhaus, originating in Germany, was actually rejected by the Nazis. Even they thought it was too much, really. Come on. That should have been a clue. And yet,
Palacio Gustavo Capanema, Rio de Janeiro, 1943. 860-880 North Lake Shore Drive Apartments, Chicago. The Seagram Building, Manhattan.
but that's just a side note. Capitalism, socialism, communism, fascism, all those Marxist or Marx-inspired terms, they are in fact meaningless. If you view economics as a scientific discipline objectively, you'll soon realize that the so-called laws keep changing. From era to era, from country to country, there's only one law of economics that never changes, that's always current, in effect, and infallible. And it runs like this. If you squeeze someone real hard, there's absolutely no guarantee against a reaction. In his dark futuristic novel titled 1984, George Orwell describes the four government ministries, Truth, Peace, Love, and Plenty, as gargantuan, glittering white concrete pyramids rising 300 meters into the air, punctuated by thousands of identical, severe rectangular windows. They feature no canonical warmth. They are ruthless abstract geometry weaponized to make individual human beings feel utterly insignificant. Orwell modeled the terrifying Ministry of Truth directly on Senate House in London. He worked there during World War II when it housed the Ministry of Information, and its repetitive, unornamented, blocky massing deeply disturbed them, as it continues to disturb openly or subtly those who have to observe it on a daily basis today. Thank you for watching. I'm Ricky Vernier, coming to you from Brooklyn, New York, and I'll see you soon.